All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the first Skype a Scientist live session of the semester. We have four live streams coming up this semester. Today, of course, is our first one. Welcome back to school. And then next month, we'll be talking about whales. The month after, we'll be talking about everyday physics. And then in December, we'll be talking about marine snails, so snails that live in the ocean, and how climate change affects them. Today, we are kicking it off with newt toxicity with Kannon Pearson. Kannon, thanks for coming with us.
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here.
Awesome. So I'm the way these sessions work, our scientist, so today Cannon, will introduce who she is, what she does, why she likes it, a little bit about what that looks like as a scientist, and then we're going to launch into your questions. So as you have questions, please submit them using the Q&A function. It's on the bottom of the screen. It has a speech bubble with a question mark in it. Go ahead and submit your questions there, and then I will read them throughout the session. So let's kick it off. Cannon, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Are you seeing the slideshow?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Hi, everybody. My name's Kannon Pearson, and today I'm going to be talking to you about poisonous newts, which I study. But first, a little bit about myself. Um, Growing up, I knew I really liked animals. I liked snakes. I liked frogs. I lived in the desert, and every time it rained, a bunch of frogs would crawl out of the ground, and I'd spend hours and hours looking for them and catching them. Um, I didn't go to traditional school. I was homeschooled and all the way up through high school. And then I went to community college for a few years before I transferred to a university to finish my undergrad degree and to start on my PhD. And during that time, I learned about another subject that I really, really liked, and that was chemistry. I liked to learn about chemicals and elements and where they came from and how they were discovered. And at some point, I realized I could combine those two interests. I could study chemicals and how they affect animals, and sort of how animals evolve and how they interact, and the ways that chemicals can affect that. Um, so ultimately, I landed in the specific area of poisonous amphibians. So I study newts and toads that have poisons. And it's a really fun way to combine those two interests of mine. Outside of my work, I like to draw. So you'll see some of my drawings throughout this presentation. I like to play Magic the Gathering. I have some Magic the Gathering earrings here, and Dungeons and Dragons. And I have a pet snake. There's a picture of him on the left. His name is Walton Hoggins, and he's my favorite. So one of the best things about my job is I get to go outside and catch animals. It is just so much fun. And as a kid, I would look for frogs and stuff, but I actually wasn't very outdoorsy. I like to stay inside and read. So it's been really fun to sort of learn about this other side of things and go out into the wild and look for creatures. Amphibians, the things that I study, are mainly found in and around water. So a lot of these pictures are me and my field teams in streams, in ponds, using nets and traps to catch newts. And this picture up in the right corner, that is a beautiful male California newt that we caught. You can see we're wearing this equipment. These are called waders, and that helps keep the water off of our bodies. But almost every time I go out, I get too excited and a little overconfident, and I go in a little bit too deep, and the water goes over the top of the waders, and I get totally soaked. And as a PhD student, I'm surrounded by lots of other biologists, and that gives me fun opportunities to do field work for other people's projects too. So I've actually spent a lot of time helping with bird research. The photo on the left is a picture of me helping take a bird out of a net. There's a photo of another bird in the middle that I helped catch in Ecuador. And on the right is a picture of a friend from a trip I took where we were out in the desert in Arizona looking at bird nests and counting eggs inside of them. I don't spend all of my time outdoors. Um, I, when I'm not sort of on field trips, I'm at the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology. I work in the museum right now, and museums, as many of you are familiar, are places where there's a lot of old things. Um, but the museum I work in doesn't have any displays and it's not open to the public. We just have all the old stuff. And my museum specializes on animals. So we have a lot of specimens of dead animals from hundreds of years of research. So this picture on the left is one of my students, Emma. She's taking pictures of some newt specimens. So these are newts that were collected maybe like 30 years ago. And she's taking pictures of them for our research. The museum also has a lab, so I get to spend time collecting samples and then extracting DNA and toxins from those samples. So in the middle is a picture of my student Derek, and he is getting some DNA out of some newt samples. And then we don't just use our specimens for science, we also use them for art. I help organize a art night every other week where we get together in the museum and we draw our museum specimens. So on the right is a picture of a tortoise shell that I drew. Okay, I want to give you all just a little bit of background on newts and their toxins before I get into the Q&A section of this. Okay, part one, what is a newt? So on the left, we have a picture of a newt. And when I'm out in the field and I hear people sort of seeing newts, they'll often say, oh my gosh, look, it's a lizard. And it's true, they do look like lizards. They've got the four limbs, 2 arms, 2 legs. They've got the tail. They're lizard shaped, but they're not lizards. Newts are amphibians. Lizards are reptiles. So newts are in the group that has frogs, and lizards are in the group that has snakes. Newts don't have scales. They lay eggs, but their eggs don't have any sort of shell. So there's a lot of differences between them. They just happen to look very similar. As I mentioned, newts are a type of amphibian, and there's 3 types of amphibians. There's frogs. Everyone knows about frogs. There's caecilians, which nobody knows about caecilians. Caecilians are like the snake version of an amphibian, and they live in the bottom of ponds and streams in the mud. And then there's salamanders on the right. And newts are a type of salamander. They're a subgroup of salamanders. So to review, we've got amphibians. It's this huge group with like 9,000 different species. And then we have salamanders, which is a smaller group that has around 800 species. And within that, we have newts, the smallest group that I'm talking about today. And here's some features of newts. Newts have an interesting lifestyle. They spend about half of their time on land and then half of their time in the water. And when they go back and forth, their bodies change. So on the left, we have this picture of a newt, and you can see how his tail is all flat. That helps it swim when it's in the water. But when it goes back on land, the tail will narrow back down so that it's not as large and it's not in the way. So the adults live on the land and they go back to the water to lay their eggs. They have rough, bumpy skin. And the part that I really care about is that they're often poisonous. And as you know, I love poisons. There's 4 species in California, and I study 3 of these guys. I study the red-bellied newts, the rough-skinned newts, and the California newts. Okay, and here's a little bit more about their poisons. Right here we have a picture of a newt. You see how its head's all stretched back, and you can see its yellow throat? So that's a warning. Newts do that when they think someone's about to eat them. And they'll do something called the Unken reflex, which is like a yoga pose where they stretch back and they show their bright yellow, orange, or red underside. And that's supposed to tell predators, hey, I'm poisonous. Don't eat me. And, you know, people really should listen to newts. I'm going to tell you an old urban legend, the coffee pot of doom. In the Oregon Coast Range in the early 1900s, folks found 3 hunters dead at their campsite. There was no sign of struggle. There was no blood. They were just in their sleeping rolls, dead. And in the middle of this campground was a coffee pot. And when people opened up the coffee pot, guess what they found inside? A rough-skinned newt. Somehow, the newt had gotten into the coffee. And we don't know how this happened, or even if the story is true, but the newt got in the coffee, poisoned the coffee, the hunters drank it, and they all perished. The culprit is tetrodotoxin. This is the poison found in newts. There's a picture of it on the right. That's its chemical structure. It's a neurotoxin, which means it targets your brain and your nervous system. It prevents your nerves from firing, which means that your brain can't communicate with the rest of your body. So when the hunters drank the tetrodotoxin in their coffee, they got paralyzed. And eventually the toxin reached their lungs and they weren't able to breathe anymore. And that's how they died. It's 1,000 times more poisonous than cyanide. And because of its chemical structure, it dissolves in water, which is why, kind of like a tea bag, when the newt got into the coffee became poisonous. The cool thing about tetrodotoxin is it's everywhere. It's actually found in a lot of different poisonous animals. It's found in the blue ring octopus in the top right. It's found in pufferfish. You may have heard sometimes people eat pufferfish as like a form of sushi, and sometimes they get poisoned by it if it's been prepared incorrectly. It's found in sea stars. It's found in these toads. There's a picture of a toad on the bottom right corner. My lab mate Maho studies those toads, and it's found in newts. So tetrodotoxin is a very complicated chemical. Its structure is very unique. And it's kind of hard to imagine that all of these different animals independently sort of got the ability to make this toxin. And it turns out the way they did this was by harnessing someone else. The animals don't make tetrodotoxin themselves, as far as we know. It seems that bacteria make the toxin. Now, bacteria, you may know, are very tiny. They're everywhere. There's quadrillions of them. And bacteria are really, really good chemists. Because their lifespans are so short and they reproduce very quickly, they can evolve all sorts of really interesting chemicals that they can produce. So in some ways, it might be easier or more expected for bacteria to learn how to make a complicated toxin than for animals to evolve that ability. And they found bacteria in the skin of newts that make tetrodotoxin. So it seems that bacteria live in the skin, they make the toxin, the newts store the toxin, and the toxin protects them against predators. I'm studying this as my part of my PhD research. I'm looking into how newts get their bacteria and the relationship between the newts and the bacteria. On the left is a picture that I drew. It is a very stylized representation of some angelic bacteria delivering tetrodotoxin to a newt larvae in the middle. Larvae is like the tadpole version of a newt. It's like a baby newt, and they've got gills. They look like tiny axolotls from Minecraft. Okay. Last question. Why are newts so toxic? How did they get so poisonous? It turns out Pacific newts can't be eaten by most predators. Most animals that will try to eat a newt will probably die or get very sick. But there are a few animals that can eat them. And one of these animals is the garter snake. On the right here is a picture of a garter snake that I found. Garter snakes are immune to the toxin, but they're not perfectly immune. If they get like a huge amount of toxin, it can sometimes affect them. So what seems to have happened is something that biologists call a coevolutionary arms race. Think of it this way. Imagine you're like a bunch of newts, and some of you are more toxic and some of you are less toxic. And garter snakes also live there. The garter snakes eat the less toxic ones, and the guys that survive are more toxic. So over time, the newts might become more toxic. As the newts become more toxic, it's harder for the garter snakes to eat you. So now there's pressure for the garter snakes to become more resistant. And it goes back and forth. It's an arms race. The newts get more toxic, the garter snakes get more resistant, and it keeps going until you get these insanely poisonous animals. And in fact, that one newt may have killed 3 hunters, but the amount of toxins found in rough-skinned newts can be enough to kill 20 people. So these are very poisonous animals in some places. Now, I do want to give a little disclaimer now that I've spent a lot of time talking about poisons. Newts are only poisonous if they're eaten. The toxin is too big to go through your skin, so it's safe to handle them with clean hands or gloves. Just, wherever you are, if you see a salamander, if you see a frog, it's probably best not to lick it. I would highly recommend not doing that. You never know what sort of bugs or poisons it might have. But but it is usually safe to gently handle amphibians with clean hands. You're a bigger risk to these animals than they are to you. So just be gentle, take pictures, and if your hands are clean, touch them gently. All right, that's all I have for my presentation, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
All right, that was awesome. Thank you so much. All right, we've got a question from Cindy in Locust Grove, Virginia. Have you ever been bitten by a poisonous snake or other animal?
Yes. Um, remember the snake that I told you I have as a pet? Unfortunately, he bit me. Um, so when animals have a toxin, but they have to bite you to give it to you, that's called being venomous. It's like an active thing. They have to inject you with the venom. And when animals have a toxin, but it's in their body, and you have to bite them to get poisoned, that's a poisonous animal. So a lot of snakes are venomous, and the newts are poisonous. My snake is slightly venomous. And sometimes in some people, you'll get a reaction if it bites you. I did get a reaction. It caused some swelling in my hand, but it went down after a day or two. Um, it was slightly painful, but not that bad of an experience.
Great, thanks. Our next question is from Bluey Williams' class. What is the coolest animal you've seen out in field work?
Oh, goodness. That is a great question. I've seen a lot of really fun animals. Um, I would say one of the coolest I saw was a large lizard in Ecuador that can run on the surface of water. Um, and so it was just like very big. I didn't see it run on the water, but it's the same species that could do that. And that was truly gorgeous. And then another really good one that I've seen and that you can see if you live in the Southwest is the chuckwalla. These are common lizards. They're very large. They live in rocks. And when they're scared, they'll squeeze between the rocks and then they'll take a deep breath and they blow up like a balloon. And it makes them impossible to pull out from between the rocks. So if you ever catch a chuckwalla, it'll take a deep breath and it swells up like a big warm burrito in your hands. And that is just so much fun.
That is really cool. I've seen those. I didn't know they did that. That's really cool. All right, our next question is from Harrison. How do the newts keep their tetrodotoxin from dissolving in the water when they're swimming?
That is an incredible question. So the way they do that is they have glands in their skin that store the toxin. So humans have sweat and oil glands. And basically you've got like your skin layers, and embedded within that skin are these different glands. They're surrounded in muscle. So when the newt is stressed, it can squeeze the muscle around the gland, and then the poison goes out onto the surface of the skin, and it makes the surface of the newt even more toxic in that moment. But yeah, they store it in the glands, and that we think helps prevent the toxin from dissolving into the water. But we are also trying to do some research on this. So one of my students is looking at a pond and she's measuring levels of tetrodotoxin in the water to see if it increases when a bunch of newts move into the pond for the breeding season.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks. Our next question is from Jordan in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. What do toxic newts mainly eat?
Great question. That is something that not a lot of people have studied, is newt diets, but it seems like they eat a lot of little bugs. So little bugs in the ponds and little bugs on land. Um, the other thing they eat is baby newts. So newts are cannibalistic and they'll eat their own young. The baby newts, the larvae, they can smell tetrodotoxin. So if there's a big adult that's super poisonous swimming towards them, the babies can smell the toxin coming off the adult, and that helps them run away and escape when the adults are trying to be cannibals.
That's sick. Cool. Thanks. Next question is from Emily at Grady Brown in North Carolina. What is the name of the type of scientist that you are? Like, I'm a squid biologist, I'm a teuthologist. What are you?
That is a great question, and I ask myself that frequently. Um, I'm a herpetologist,
Hmm.
which is a scientist who studies amphibians and reptiles. At the same time, I'm also someone who really likes chemical ecology and evolution. So I might call myself an evolutionary biologist or a chemical ecologist. Um, my research is kind of diverse, so there's a lot of different things I do. Um, But yeah, different labels you could pick for it. But usually I just go with herpetologist.
Cool. Room 102 wants to know, can you explain the difference between amphibians and reptiles?
Yeah. So there's a few ways to go about this. From an evolutionary perspective, they're just different sorts of animals. They've evolved separately. Um, but sort of from a like natural history perspective, there's a few differences. Reptiles have scales. Amphibians don't have scales. Amphibian skin tends to be moist, it's slimy, and they can breathe through their skin. Um, and so breathing through their skin requires their skin to be a little bit moist, which is why they often live in or around water, so they can stay wet and they can breathe through their skin. Reptiles can't do that. They've got scales, their skin is tough. Oftentimes, reptiles are more adapted for like drier conditions in some cases, and they don't have to live near water. Reptiles lay eggs that have shells. Sometimes they're usually like a soft shell. Amphibians lay eggs that are just like globs of jelly. Um, and then the other really cool thing is that reptiles hatch out of their eggs and they look like a little adult reptile. Like a lizard that hatches looks like a tiny lizard, or a snake looks like a tiny snake. Amphibians often have two different life stages. They have their baby stage and they have their adult stage. So in frogs, they hatch out of the egg and they're tadpoles first, and then they grow their legs and they metamorphose into adults. And in salamanders, they hatch out and they look like little tadpoles, but they have gills. And they swim around for a while before they metamorphose and leave the water. And axolotls, which are a very famous salamander, are basically salamanders that never lose their baby traits. So they always have their baby gills, even when they're grown up adults.
Sweet. Thank you. All right, the next question is from Renfro's fourth grade class. Are there different types of poisonous newts that are toxic to the other types of newts?
Great question. Um, it sort of depends, right? So there are different types of poisonous newts. In North America, our newts seem to mainly have tetrodotoxin. So the newts in California and the newts in the East, the spotted newts, they all have tetrodotoxin. Um, if you go to Europe, you'll find newts that may have slightly different toxins. We haven't really studied them as thoroughly. Uh, well, there's a group that has this toxin that is super famous, totally different from tetrodotoxin. And so it's possible if you got like a European newt and you had to eat like an egg from a Pacific newt that it might get poisoned. But there isn't really a scenario in which they'll ever be together except in the lab.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't think we super know whether or not they're poisonous to each other.
Cool. We've got a question from an anonymous attendee. Thanks for the great talk. What are some ways that we can help protect newts and their habitats?
That is a wonderful question. It sort of depends on where you live and what newts are around you. But if you live on the Pacific coast, uh, the newts that I study are the ones that are going to be closest to you. And one of the big threats to those guys are roads. So every year, these newts migrate back to the same ponds to breed. And if you take a newt anywhere, like in a 5 mile radius, and drop it in a random spot, it'll still figure out how to get back to that same pond. They've got really good senses of direction. So when the first rains come in like November, you have these huge armies of newts that all crawl together to get back to their ponds. And they often cross roads, and thousands and thousands and thousands of roads of newts get killed on the roads by cars. Um, so there's a few different newt brigades in California where basically they get together at night and they help newts cross the road. Um, there's also been some work to try and close some roads seasonally so that the newts aren't getting run over as much. So yeah, I would say do some research. If you're in California, maybe Google a newt brigade and see if you can help out.
That would be, I live in Philadelphia, so I'm very far from that sort of thing. But that would be like a dream, like retirement volunteer gig for me.
That would be
Nighttime
so fun.
newt crossing guard. That's the dream. That's great. That sounds so fun. All right, next question's from Raylin. How long have you been a scientist?
Good question. Um, I have been in my program for about 5 years now, but I've been doing science for a long time. I did my first sort of science projects when I was a teenager. Um, And I think being a scientist is in many ways sort of like a way of thinking. And so I don't know, I feel like I always wanted to understand how things worked, and I always wanted to learn more about the world and the way things are. And so that sort of scientific mindset was something that I've always cared about. But I've been a scientist in a stricter sense probably for like 5 or 6 years now.
Cool, thanks. Okay. Oh, Harrison wants to know, how is the garter snake immune to the toxin?
Incredible question. Okay, so imagine you eat a poison, right? The first thing you have to do is eat it. And then the poison will travel down your throat. And depending on the toxin, it'll often dissolve into your bloodstream, or it'll leave your digestive tract and go into your bloodstream. Then the toxin will float through your bloodstream, and eventually it reaches its target. Every poison has a target. It's the protein or the part of the body that it attacks. In the case of tetrodotoxin, they attack these channels in nerve cells. These are proteins that basically let the nerves fire. And so the toxin floats up and it blocks these channels. So basically the nerves can't fire because the toxin has plugged up the nerve. Um, Garter snakes have a mutation in their channels that just don't let tetrodotoxin bind. So the toxin can get all the way through the body of the garter snake, but by the time it gets to the nerve, it just doesn't stick. It bounces off. But there's lots of different ways to be immune to toxins. So like if you're smart enough not to eat the toxic thing, that's in some ways an immunity, right? Or if your digestive tract has like a really strong lining and doesn't let the toxin out of your digestive system, that's another immunity. So there's all sorts of different ways to do it. But garter snakes seem to mainly do it with this sort of target insensitivity.
Cool. Great. All right. We've had a couple people ask like a similar question. So Shannon Floyd and Rebecca Burnett from Locust Grove, Virginia, and perhaps others want to know like, so this is cool to study because it's cool, but what are like the downstream applications of studying newt toxins?
That is a great question. Um, so as far as the specific thing that I focus on, which is the relationship between newts and their bacteria, that is really relevant to human health in interesting ways. So there's been a lot of research finding out that bacteria are really important for our bodies. They live in our guts, they live on our skin. And if those bacterial communities get disrupted, you often get sick. So I'm studying how newts basically attract and maintain a specific kind of helpful bacteria. In this case, the helpful bacteria is helpful because it's making a toxin for them. Um, and that'll just help us understand better how animals get helpful bacteria and how they keep helpful bacteria in their bodies, which is sort of a big ongoing question that's relevant to human health and livestock health and agriculture.
Yeah. It's a lot of people are studying it from a lot of different angles to try to figure out a very complex situation. That's what I did my PhD on too, but
Oh,
with
cool.
bioluminescent bacteria and squid. So
An incredible
similar,
system.
yeah, another good symbiosis. All right, Kat wants to know, we know that poison dart frogs are not toxic if they don't eat toxins in their diets. Can we raise a non-toxic newt in captivity without access to the bacteria that gives them the toxin?
That is a great question. In theory, yes. In practice, it's been very complicated.
Hmm.
So there's been a few studies where they've raised newts uh, outside of the ponds, and sometimes the newts come out poisonous, and sometimes the newts come out non-toxic. Um, and it seems to be like just really tricky to raise a newt that's healthy in an environment where there's no bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, sometimes a study will be like, we raised the newts and they're toxic. And then you'll find out that the study used pond water. So maybe they got bacteria from the pond water that settled on the newts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or if you raised a baby newt next to an adult newt, the baby newt will become toxic. So maybe it seems like the bacteria might sort of transfer from the adults to the babies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, it can be done. But I will say raising newts in captivity is just really, really tough. And
Yeah.
so that's why my research focuses on going outside and catching newts in the wild, because I sort of didn't want to deal with the complications of that.
Yeah. Same with squid, raising squid in captivity, really hard. I did it for my PhD. It's very fun and very cute, but
Uh,
very hard. Um, yeah, and sometimes we would just bacteria or not or antibiotic treat the squid, so you'd create like
yeah,
a no symbiont. Symbiont is the bacteria that lives inside the animal. I know you knew that, but for everybody else.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's really a challenge. All right. Let's see. Ooh, okay, we got two interesting questions here. One, we know that birds lay eggs and then the moms stay with the eggs and take care of the babies, etc. What do newts do? Do they, after they lay the eggs, do amphibians stick with the eggs or no?
Newts eat their own eggs. So they're not very caring parents. They will like find the eggs and they'll be like, yay, a snack, and they'll just eat them. Um, Thankfully, the eggs are in these really thick coats of jelly, and it makes it a little harder for them to be cannibalistic. Uh, there are some amphibians that show parental care. It's pretty rare, but in some poison frogs, for instance, they'll lay single eggs and there'll be a little tadpole, just like in a little bromeliad in a plant in the rainforest. And the parents will travel between all these different plants and like feed all their different babies and watch all their different babies. So it happens, but I would say most amphibians don't really show parental care.
Cool, thanks. And that question was from Addie from Garden Spot Middle School in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Uh, Garden Spot always shows up to these, so I appreciate them being here. Hey, Garden Spot. Okay, next question. Is there a reason, this is from Anne, is there a reason why the newts go in and out of the water?
Good question. Um, they go into the water to lay their eggs. Uh, and the eggs, as I've mentioned, they're kind of these big globs of jelly. And so their eggs would dehydrate if they were laid on land and the larvae wouldn't survive. And then when their babies hatch out, they hatch out as these little aquatic animals. So they also have to be in the water. So the water is where they do all their reproduction and stuff. But during the drier seasons, the adults leave the water and they go hide out underground or under logs to stay moist until the rains come back.
Cool. We've got a question that again came from multiple different groups, including Sarah Brennan and Zach from Garden Spot Middle, among others. Let's say, you end up getting tetrodotoxin. Is there like an anti-toxin? Is there a way of dealing with that?
There is not. There is no antitoxin for tetrodotoxin right now. But if we think about tetrodotoxin, its main effect is that it paralyzes you. And it kills you by paralyzing your diaphragm, which is the muscle that lets you breathe.
Hmm.
So if you've got tetrodotoxin poisoning and they get you to a hospital and they put you on a ventilator, in many cases you can survive because
Oh,
it'll keep you breathing until your body removes the toxin from your system. Um, Often, sort of the thing that happens is you die due to a lack of oxygen, or if you do survive, you'll often have like some amount of damage to your brain or to your body from that lack of oxygen. But yeah, getting on a ventilator is your best bet.
cool. I didn't know. That's good to know. Right, we got a question from Renee at Gab. How long have you had a pet snake, and is it easy to take care of?
Yeah, I've actually had this snake for just like 6 months now. I got him from a friend. Um, he is very easy to take care of. I just feed him once a week, and I update his water. Um, I made a bioactive tank. So he lives
Hmm.
in a tank that's got like little roly-polies in it, and it's got some beetles in it, and it's got some tiny bugs that eat mold. And so the tank sort of cleans itself. All these little creatures eat the waste and they eat the dead plants in the tank, and it's got some like plants. So it took a little while to set up, and it was super fun, but he's a very easy pet to have, and I enjoy him very much.
That's great. My snake, I've had my snake for like 8 years now. She's a ball python. I have a snake too.
Oh,
Snakes
cute.
are
Yeah.
pretty easy pets. As long as you get their like humidity and their temperature and all that, right? Once you get that established, they're
Mhm.
pretty easy.
It's like high
Um,
investment and it's easy.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. A lot of attention to detail at the beginning, but after that, it's pretty good. Great classroom pet too. Gideon wants to know, do you have a favorite newt?
Okay, so there is a newt. I can't remember the common name right now. That's rough. I think it's like the Iberian, no, either way. Uh, it's Pleurodelis wattle is the scientific name.
Mhm.
And this is a newt that has large bumps on the sides of its bodies. And these bumps are clusters of poison glands. Remember
Mm.
how I said my newts have poison glands? Their poison glands are spread evenly throughout the body. And so They look kind of bumpy, but like they don't have any lumps. These newts have huge lumps on the sides of their body. And when they're threatened, they will contort their spines and their ribs will shoot out of the sides of their body. Each rib will pierce through one of those giant poison glands, and they'll have these poison-tipped bones sticking out of their body that can impale predators or you if you're being annoying to it. And then once the threat has passed, they will twist their body back. The ribs will retract, just like Wolverine, and then they heal very quickly. So they don't really suffer any injury from literally shooting their ribs out of their body. So insanely cool animal.
Wow, that's cool. I've heard a lot of animal facts in my day, but I'd never heard of that one. That's bananas. That's really, really cool. Metal newts. Really cool. Okay. We actually already answered that one. Oh, there's a good one. I don't know if you'll know this, but where did the word newt come from? Why do we call them newts?
That is a great question. I actually don't
No,
know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Good question. All right, we got a question from a North Carolina in Hillsborough, North Carolina. Silas wants to know, are there poison newts or salamanders in North Carolina?
In North Carolina,
That's
I
in
think there
Appalachia.
are.
There's
I
some
think you've
Appalachia
got
in there.
the like eastern spotted newts out there. Um, Actually, I'm going to Google this really quick
Yeah.
just to
In
be
the
sure.
meantime, I'll find the next question.
Yeah, you get the eastern newt. Um, so those are super cute. You can find them in the woods. They have a little bright orange juvenile form that is terrestrial. So you can find these like bright orange cuties walking through the woods. And they also have tetrodotoxin, but they have it in much lower levels than the newts in California. So um, yeah, they're not that toxic.
Cool. If you like handled one of these newts and then you ate a very messy food and like licked your hands, would that get you into trouble?
I don't think so. I know a lot of people who grew up with the newts and it's like were
Uh-huh.
not very careful as kids when they'd handle
Right.
them and then eat food, and none of them had any
Probably fine.
problems. I will say though, um, the toxin, like I said, it's too big to go through your skin easily.
Hmm.
But when I first started my field work, I was like, I won't wear gloves, like it's fine. And then I handled like 500 newts in one day. Um, and the tips of my fingers did get numb. So in huge amounts, it can cause a little bit of local numbness.
Yikes. Good to know.
Yeah,
I'd still be washing my paws after I touch those newts. I wouldn't.
I highly recommend washing your hands before
Yeah.
and after.
Yeah. Cool. Delilah from Garden Spot Middle in Lancaster. Do you know any good newt jokes?
I don't. That is a really good prompt, and I should work on that.
Sounds good. Uh, Oh, okay. So the newts that you work on, are they the most toxic of the newts, or are there newts in other places in the world that are more toxic?
These are the most toxic that we know of, specifically the rough-skinned newts.
Sweet. Sarah wants to know, is there a different Sarah? Is there a newt able to regrow its tail the way lizards can?
Yes, newts are incredibly good at regrowing their bodies. Um, Actually, like way better than lizards. Like lizards can regrow their tails, right? Newts
Hmm.
can regrow their fingers, their arms, their legs, their tails, and their eyes.
Whoa,
So they've got incredible regenerative abilities, and people are actually studying that.
cool. An wants to know, how long do newts live?
Newts, in at least the species I study, we think they can live up to 30 years. So some of the newts that I'm handling are older than me, which is kind of crazy.
That is wild. That's really impressive. Okay. How long does it take the tetrodotoxin to take effect? So how long do you have until you get to a hospital?
Good question. It really kind of depends on the dosage.
Hmm.
Um, I think it takes a few hours.
I know in the blue ring octopus, no, that's like it. They bite you, so it goes directly into
Yeah.
your bloodstream, which is a totally different like ball game. But that I think
Mhm.
you have like a half hour.
Yeah.
But when you eat it, that takes way longer. So
Yeah. When you eat it, it's got to go through like your mouth, your digestive tract, and then like diffuse into your blood. And then if it
mhm.
gets injected, it's right away in your
Just bam.
bloodstream and
Yeah,
like you're in danger.
totally. That's why you should never pick up an octopus in Australia, or ideally anywhere for the
Yeah.
octopus's sake. But yeah, definitely no touching octopuses in Australia. We've got another one from Garden Spot Middle. Can you eat, like if you ate a dead newt, would that still do the trick?
Yeah, tetrodotoxin is a very stable molecule.
Hmm.
So even if a newt is dead, the toxin will just sit there. Like it won't really degrade. Um, yeah, it just
It's
still
in there.
dangerous.
Cool. Miriam wants to know what's the largest newt species and how big is it?
I don't think they actually get that big. Um, I wouldn't know off the top of my head, but I do know there aren't any that are like spectacularly
Gigantic.
large. The
Yeah.
newts I handle sometimes look at up to like yay big,
Mhm.
really pretty, really big. But if we zoom out from newts and just look at salamanders, the biggest salamanders are aquatic salamanders found in China and Japan. And those can get to be like 3 feet long. They're huge. And it's been a lifelong dream for me to see one.
Yeah, same actually. Those are really cool. Okay, we are almost at the end of our time here, and we always ask every scientist the same two questions at the end of sessions. The first question is, if you had everyone's attention in the whole world and you could tell them one thing about your area of expertise, what would it be?
That is an incredible question. I would say amphibians have truly incredible diversity of chemicals in their skin, and they are also the most endangered group of vertebrate animals. And every time we lose an amphibian, every time it goes extinct, we lose all sorts of chemicals that we'll never have the chance to study. So I think it's really important that we try to conserve amphibians, and I think it's really important that we research them while we still can.
Great answer. The second question is, you still have everybody's attention in the whole world, and you can tell them anything about anything. It could be serious and meaningful, or silly and funny, whatever you'd like.
Uh, I would say just do what sort of brings you joy. And whether that's in your work or somewhere else in your life, just like find something that brings you joy and pursue it. Even if it's something that other people don't love or aren't encouraging of, you gotta make sure that you're okay and you're happy. So take care of yourselves and be safe out there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Do you have anything else that you'd like to plug? Anywhere that people can find you on the internet?
Yeah, so you can find me on Blue Sky or on Instagram. My handle is tarika.rivularis. It's just the species name of the red-bellied newt. So if you Google the red-bellied newt, you'll find my handle name. Um, and I'm finishing up my PhD over the next couple of years in California. And after that, not sure where I'll go, but I hope to keep doing outreach like this and talking to folks about salamanders and newts.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing all of your knowledge. This has been really cool. I learned stuff. I'm sure everybody in the classroom learned stuff too. This was really fun. Um, and thank you, Laura, for interpreting. Appreciate you. Our next session will be in October, and we'll be talking about whales with my buddy Iman, who is always on boats looking at whales. The texts we get from him are just so cool. So look forward to whales. You can RSVP at skypeascientist.com, click live streams and RSVP there. We will see you all next month. Welcome back to school. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next month.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.